This is Matt Caddo, Senior Fellow on Public Policy, and I'm reaching out today to respond to a publicly posted article by Wendy Chamberlain, one of the founders of the anti-kratom group known as Kratom Danger Awareness. In this online article, which she titled When Grief Becomes a Battleground, Ms. Chamberlain attacks any critic of families who have experienced the unimaginable grief of losing a loved one. No one disputes the grief of a parent who has lost a child. No one questions the pain of a spouse, sibling, or family member left behind after a tragedy. Every loss is real. Every family deserves compassion. Every loved one deserves dignity. But compassion cannot replace evidence and data. The central flaw in Ms. Chamberlain's article is that it attempts to transform a scientific and forensics discussion into a debate about feelings. The issue has never been whether families are grieving. The issue is whether the public claims being made about the causes of death are supported by the evidence. Once the death is used as a basis for public policy, legislative testimony is provided, media campaigns are deployed, and calls to ban kratom products used by millions of Americans, the underlying evidence is no longer beyond scrutiny. It becomes subject to the same examination required of any claim to justify government action. That is not disrespect. That is accountability. The article repeatedly suggests that questioning an autopsy report or toxicology finding somehow constitutes an attack on a family. It does not. A forensic review is not a review of a family's grief. It is a review of the work performed by coroners, medical examiners, and toxicologists. Those are entirely different things. What has been missing from the discussion is an acknowledgement that many of the deaths repeatedly cited in anti-kratom campaigns involve significant scientific questions. In numerous cases, independent experts have identified concerns regarding toxicology interpretation, causation analysis, polydrug exposure, underlying medical conditions, mental health histories, and departures from accepted forensic standards in evaluating the death of any individual. These concerns are not directed at families. They are directed at the investigative process. Indeed, if mistakes were made, the people most harmed by those mistakes may be the families themselves. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has called out the lack of nationally established post-mortem standards as a reason why many kratom-related deaths are misclassified. It appears that presentations at conferences where these coroners and medical examiners regularly attend has led these officials listing kratom on an autopsy when no credible evidence exists to support that finding. Every parent deserves accurate answers. Every family deserves the truth. If an investigation overlooked important evidence, misinterpreted toxicological findings, or prematurely established or attributed causation, then families may have been deprived of a complete understanding of what happened to their loved one. The article also expresses concern about autopsy and toxicology reports being publicly discussed, and Ms. Chamberlain, in other postings, criticized the American Kratom Association for discussing these inaccurate autopsies and toxicology reports at a congressional briefing on kratom last week in Washington, D.C. That concern rings hollow. Many of the same deaths now being described as private matters have been repeatedly presented in legislative hearings, media interviews, documentaries, advocacy campaigns, and public testimony, specifically designed to influence lawmakers and regulators. Families and advocacy organizations have voluntarily brought these cases into the public arena to support bans on natural kratom leaf products. Ms. Chamberlain herself regularly participates and provides testimony in these hearings, and the Kratom Danger Awareness Group encourages others in their group to do the same. One cannot simultaneously use a death as a centerpiece of a public policy campaign and then argue that the underlying evidence should be immune from examination. If a death is cited as proof that kratom caused harm, then the evidence supporting that claim must be available for scrutiny. That is how science works. That is how public health policy should work. That is how legislators make informed decisions. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of this debate is the reported effort to discourage families from sharing autopsy reports, toxicology findings, and investigative records with independent experts. That is the Kratom Danger Awareness Group's policy. Why? If the evidence is as compelling as claimed, independent review should strengthen the conclusions, not threaten them. Scientific confidence grows through transparency. It does not grow through restricting access to evidence. The public should also understand that the mere presence of a substance in a toxicology report does not establish causation. Toxicology screens frequently identify substances that were present at the time of death but played no meaningful role in causing it. Determining causation requires a careful assessment of concentrations, pathology, medical history, co occurring substances, and the totality of the evidence. That is precisely why independent review is important. In some of the publicly discussed cases, critics have pointed to findings involving extremely low or even non quantifiable levels of metrogenine while simultaneously attributing substantial causation significance to kratom. The more relevant issues in that particular case that were totally ignored was evidence of a past overdose on cocaine and fentanyl, and the levels of multi-substance, including sedating antihistamines, an SSRI antidepressant, DXM, cannabis markers, amphetamines, and acetaminophen, all of which present a complicated array of factors where the levels of metrogenine in that case were so low they were not even quantifiable, merely detected as present. That finding by a coroner appears to make absolutely no sense, and it certainly is not supported by any evidence and data that metrogenine played any significant role in this death. Such conclusions deserve rigorous examination and should not be accepted without question simply because they appear in an official report. Medical examiners and coroners perform difficult and important work, but they are not infallible. Their conclusions are subject to review, correction, and disagreement, just like the conclusions of any other scientific discipline. History is filled with examples where forensics determinations were later revised after additional analysis became available. No family should be attacked. No family should be mocked. No family should be deprived of compassion. But neither should grief be used as a shield against scientific inquiry. The question has never been whether those families suffered a terrible loss. The question is whether the evidence support the conclusions being used to shape public policy. Families deserve the truth. Legislators deserve the truth. The public deserves the truth. And truth can never be afraid of scrutiny. Thank you.